2009 informational committee meeting. And today we're going to be discussing the 2012 process phase 4. Katie, could you please do a roll call, please?
Ron Weifenbach. Patty Martinson. Sam Quaker.
Here.
Deb Hadcock. Bill Waugh.
Here.
Karen Gunderson Olson.
Here.
Ron Kroger. Lloyd LaCroix.
Here.
Aaron Costello.
Here.
Malcolm Chapman.
Here.
Thank you, Katie. We're going to start out. You guys should have an informational pack with the updated Vision 2012 projects. And you should also have a pack that Kay had sent out as far as has the ordinance on it, and it will also have the resolution from 05, phase 3, and then you'll have some minutes from the city council meeting. So hopefully you guys had a chance to review. Council leadership, Vice President Malcolm Chapman and I had sat down and gone over some stuff for the process of the 2012 this coming year, the phase 4. And I think this is a very exciting time for us. We've had a couple comments that were sent in from a couple council members. We reviewed those, and that's what we're here today to do is start setting some dates, kind of go over how the committees will be set up, get input from the council on how they'd like to proceed. And the exciting part about this is I think we've got 4 council members who are on the 2012 phase 3, so that's the exciting part. At this point in time, I'd agreed Mr. Chapman was on the 2012 back on phase 3. I'd like to have him review what we'd come up with to present to the council.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to hand out a sheet to everyone. And this is just for discussion purposes. Do you have it? Oh, yeah, let me just go around. Here you go, Sam. I'll wait till everyone gets one. I'll just ask if you could just give me an opportunity to go through this, and then let's throw all of these ideas on the floor and then have some discussion. What we did was we put a couple of different columns on here. You'll see a 2005, that's actually what the process was in 2005, and then 2010 is what Lloyd and I are proposing that we at least start the discussion with, and then we'll tell the rationale of why we did what we did and said what we said. You'll see the first column says committees. In 2005, there were 3 9-person committees with 2 alternates per committee. This time, we're talking of putting together 3 4-person committees with 3 council members on each committee, so that information can flow back and forth easily between the council or the entire 2012 committee, which is a makeup of the council, and what actually takes place at the committee levels. Council president would not be assigned to a committee. He could just roll and go to any of these committees that he'd like to participate in. And then we're also recommending that partial funding of projects be discouraged or not allowed, simply because, I'll go through all of them and then I'll tell the rationale. In 2005, you see the timeline that was created, and I'll just start with the beginning part of that timeline. The 2012 process actually started in April of 2004 when the council created the citizen subcommittees. That was done by ordinance, and then all the way to the approval of the 2012 process, which was November 2005. The council approved the resolution for the 3rd phase of 2012. And then you see all the things that happened in between. This time we're looking at having this discussion, putting whatever we do today here on the next legal and finance agenda so that we can start the discussion, thinking that we could hammer out the process by the end of December. Both applications for committee members as well as projects could go out probably the first week of January. We'd give 30 days for those committee applicants to get back in, so by the end of January or the 1st of February, we actually get the dates correct. Those would be due. 60 days for projects, and then sometime in March of 2010, hold public hearings. April, have the committees report to the council the recommendations for the 2012. That would then give the council the month of May, probably the month of June, and July if we wanted to deliberate and tweak or whatever we would like to do with them, and then start the next round of 2012 and announce that those projects in late June or early July of 2010. The current structure, which is the same structure that existed in 2005, where 50% of the monies were designated for municipal infrastructure and then 25% for both civic improvements and economic development. We received one request from a council member to say, let's look at changing that structure to 25% municipal infrastructure, 50% civic improvements, and 25% economic development. Whatever comments that we receive from the council, we put down here in these columns so that at least we can start the discussion from that point. In 2005, we bonded for 7 years. The bond that we did in 2005 will be paid off in 2012. The bond that we did in 2007 for the Civic Center will be paid off in 2014. This time, we're just saying let's at least start the conversation with a pay-as-you-go. If we did that, that would give an opportunity for both of those previous bonds to be paid off before the 5th round of 2012 would start, which would be 2014, 2015, somewhere in that time frame. So this next round, we're just talking pay-as-you-go. If that's not what we want to do, again, we've got time for discussion for all of that. There's a column on here for other items for discussion. These came up through some of the comments that were made, and obviously there's room for other discussion as well. Sam sent in items. He was addressing specific projects that we should look at. I didn't put those on here simply because we're not at that stage yet to talk about projects, but Lloyd and I talked about the projects and to make sure that we keep those handy, and when we start talking projects, those will come forward. But this is just for the process. So a quarterly reporting process. The second one says that those groups that need additional funds outside of 2012, if they have to raise other funds for their project, that they present a budget and a timeline on how those funds will be raised and then how those funds will be used. And then there was a question about better clarity around the definition of quality of life under the civic improvements. And then the last one on here is just the name of 2012. I know that it will always be 2012. When it's 2050, the program will still be called 2012, generically, or at least on the street. But, should we think about changing the name? So this is what Lloyd and I came up with as a discussion item for today. And then we'd like to have the discussion start around this and any other things that the council would like to discuss as it relates to the process. So with that, I'll stand for any questions, or we can open up the process of discussion.
Or Lloyd? I need to turn on my microphone.
Yes.
I just want to make some observations about this fund. Originally, this fund came about because it was the cent tax that was added to fund the Civic Center when it was originally built. And when that was coming to a close because those bonds had been paid off, the discussion was, should we continue this tax because it's doing important things in our community? And quite a bit of it is paid in reality by people from outside the community because obviously it's a sales tax. And the folks who crafted the original program did so with the understanding that they were not just dealing with a citywide additional infrastructure and other good things for the city. They also realized it was tied to approving the continuation of the tax. And so as they did that, they built a set of projects that they thought crossed a variety of political and interest boundaries. And if you go back and review those projects that were done, they were dealing with the realities of how do you present something that will enable people to understand that this tax is sufficiently valuable for us as a community and will do enough of a variety of things that we can continue to support it. So as they crafted it, the projects represented a wide diversity of communities that came together. And so the interest then brought a larger interest group together to support the continuation of the tax and enabled that to occur, in addition to the fact that they did, out of it, there were some really good things that got built as a result of that. And I don't think we can forget the fact that there is an element of a political process to this that involves the community at large. And so I think we need to continue to realize that what we need to present, what we need to fund, have broad appeal, cross lines of interest that continue to make people feel like the addition of this sales tax is serving enough of the community to continue to have support for that continuance. There's less of a problem now than there was, I can't remember exactly when this happened, because a lot of good things have come out of it, and people do recognize it as serving the community in a positive way. But as council people, I don't think we can forget that building this coalition that serves not just the interest of a few, but a broad coalition of folks, probably ultimately ensures that, number one, this tax will continue to be present for us to provide these really wonderful projects and additional infrastructure to our community. And for some of you, you may have been a part of that decision to extend half cent, but some of you may not. And I thought it was a discussion that we needed to historically understand, because that broad coalition is important in making people continue to feel that this serves in their best interest. Thank you.
Just a couple other things about this sheet that I didn't say. Let's say, for instance, what's listed under the 2010 that proposed, if we did all of that, that first column up there as it relates to committees would require an ordinance change. And I think it would require an ordinance change. And that could be done early on if we want to change the committee structures. It's something written in the ordinance already that says it takes 2/3 to change it, but that would require an ordinance change. And there was one other thing, but I can't remember.
Earlier on, Malcolm, you mentioned you were going to explain the rationale for partial funding of projects being discouraged.
You know, I think it's, I mean, I'm with Karen, that I think 2012 works best when it appeals to the mass of the community. So I am fully supportive of bringing citizen groups in to help vet those projects and see what the community really wants. But in partial funding, I mean, we create some difficulties that, you know, there's a group that wants to come forward to do Project A, and they only get $200,000 of $1 million project. And then we have 10 projects that are in that same category. That becomes difficult, and I think we burden city staff that's working on these, RJ and those that are working on them. So I think those best projects are projects that either come with money in hand or that we can fully fund through the 2012 process. So that's why we just said discourage 20.
I'm sorry to talk so much about this, but I've been on the nonprofit funding side of this a lot. I've been a part of a number of projects in the community in which you had to raise money. And if you have literally dozens, there are dozens of organizations who are out raising money for all kinds of worthy things. But the more we contribute to that, the less likely we are of enabling an organization to be successful in really reaching their goals, because our community maxes out. There's a point in time in which there is no more money to fund things. And so I think we do a disservice if we don't fully fund them or make some real specifications, because it's easy, and those of you who are on the council, you know how difficult it is when you have someone in the audience who has something that's valid and helpful and important. How do we say no to them? These committees operate exactly the same way. It's hard to say no to something that's worthy. So they can help us if we specify that there needs to be a lot more vetting of those projects. So they help us winnow down the number of projects so that what we have is something that's doable. It should still be widely representative, and I think we still can do that within the community. But let those committees help us in that process of winnowing the large numbers down to something that truly can be funded, and that as a fundraising effort, and most of these things will require some outside fundraising, that they legitimately can reach their goals in a reasonable time frame, with reasonable expectations.
Thank you, Karen. Well, me and Malcolm had discussed this, and I'm a firm believer that, as Ms. Olson just said, that, you spread them out too thin, and I believe the whole idea of the 2012 projects is to fund something and have something to show for it. I mean, the Civic Center was a prime example. We funded it, you've seen it done, and that's how we do it, I think, and if we want to continue on, we need to be able to support the projects that come forward 100% or pretty darn close to it, because raising the funds in this time and age is tough to do, as far as if you have 5 or 6 or 8 groups partially funded trying to raise money in the community, it makes it really tough. And I think Sam was next. Okay.
Just a quick, remember what I was gonna say earlier. At the end of the last round of 2012, there were projects that weren't done, that weren't started. And so I think the council is gonna have to somehow address that as we're moving to the next round. If there are projects that, I think for the most part, they're all underway in some level, but I think there's still money in the 2012 kitty right now, so we need to think about that. How does that play a part in the next round, so.
Recognize Ron Whitemark.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to need a little bit further explanation of this, because as I understand Alderman Chapman and as I understand Alderwoman Olson, they're really talking about two different things here in my mind, and hopefully somebody can clarify this. A partially funded project. I mean, the doll was partially funded. That would be a project that we would want to discourage. I'm not sure, because
No. Did you want to address?
Sure. What I'm suggesting, Ron, is that when you go in, you need to be more those committees, they need to be somewhat more discriminating, the council needs to be discriminating. In other words, the money needs to be clearly, the more the city funds it, the less pressure you put on the funding community, the nonprofit community, to raise money. And I don't think we go back and review projects in the past. I just think that for a lot of organizations, we created some real problems. We said we'll give you a little bit to help you get started, and that's really, really difficult. In the fundraising world, increasingly organizations who are funders are saying to their fundees, we're going to give you enough money that you can do this project, because we know there's not lots of money out there. And I think that that's applicable to our case. And I don't think we should go back and review what we've done in the past, because I think in the past there have been some difficulties. And so I think if the only thing we learned from that is maybe what not to do, but I don't think we should agonize about who did what and who said what about it, because I think that isn't very helpful. But going forward, if we can't fund them in a major way, I don't think giving out small amounts to encourage something to get started really is effective. Thank you.
Ron, just to piggyback on that, a prime example from my thinking was that what came forward for the Civic Center was a $4 million funding package. That's partial funding. We funded a piece of it from each one of the 3 committees. That was partial funding. So the council then came back in and said, no, we're going to fund the Civic Center fully. And all of a sudden you see that now we had to come up with an additional $15, $18 million or whatever that was to get to that total. So when I say that, I don't mean just discourage those that are saying we're going to fundraise, but that goes to Patty's point. Patty says if they're going to do outside fundraising, then we need to have a budget and a timeline that shows what you're going to do.
okay, that's the clarification, and I agree with that, because we see
Absolutely.
projects that are sitting out there right now that have full confidence they're never gonna be funded. So I agree with that, and not to digress, but, because I was getting the mixed of what's going on here, but if we got an organization out there, say, the Downtown Association, they wanna bring forward the plaza or something like that, I mean, if they're gonna bring in $3 million, and we're gonna say, oh, we're gonna discourage that, no, we wanna pay the whole thing, I think that
No,
would be a bit
that's
long.
not-
Okay,
That's not
Okay.
what I mean, in other words, there needs to be a really solid package of how they're gonna fund it, and if they've got some, in other words, if you have a group that come in and say, we're gonna raise $8 million, and, I mean, there's no way they can do that. I think it needs to be a reasonable package, and it's usually, for a lot of organizations, it's a mixture of grants, of which they have a track record of receiving grants, that's helpful. Other supporting materials that shows that those additional dollars are a real possibility.
and that would be part of this vetting process to
Yes.
go, I would agree with something like that would make sense, and lay that on the councils, but I thought maybe that was done in the process before. But I obviously wasn't privy to that information, but I would think that would be just a common sense approach to improving the project, but I agree with that, so.
Sam?
Going back to Karen's earlier comment, I think also that the including having heavy citizen involvement is important. And I think a brief historical perspective is important, because if you look at a lot of other cities in South Dakota, they also have 3 pennies of sales tax, general fund, and then capital improvements and B&B. And in certain cases, the B&B applies. So we have taken our second penny and we've divided it into capital improvements in 2012. And I think that we lose some of the special meaning of 2012, and if we just have council committees, because then we might as well just merge it with capital improvements and like other cities do. But I think there's a special meaning that can be derived by having heavy citizen involvement in 2012 and having it be a fundamentally different process than capital improvement. So I would be an advocate of continuing to have the citizen committees. I also think that it's important that the committees identify a tipping point for the project. Like, for example, the $100,000 that we gave to the hospice house was critical in allowing them to move forward with the project. But there were other situations where organizations came forward and said, give us whatever you can, and we'll make good use of it, which isn't entirely a bad thing, but it creates some policy challenges. So I agree with Karen also that what we should try to do is define that a lot more, that if somebody's asking for dollars of any amount, they need to give us an overall plan of how that would fit in. Thank you.
I guess I'm gonna, Malcolm, did you want to respond to that why we come up with the 3 and 4
Sure.
instead of the 9?
And again, this is just a starting point, but by no means does this get away from the citizen involvement. Those 3 4-person committees are citizens. I mean, those are citizens out in the community. Those aren't council members. In addition to the 4 individuals from outside the city structure are 3 council members, in addition to the 4. So each committee now would have 7 people, 4 from the public, 3 from the council, and the sole reason that the 3 from the council are there is so that when we start having that discussion at a council level, it's not a total disconnect from what went on at the committee, so that, it's not to advocate, but it's to articulate what happened at the committee level. And, I talked with Jason earlier about this. Should those council members be voting members on the committee? I mean, that's something that I think we should talk about. Should that committee have 5 members from the public and 3 members from the council? We can structure, this was just a way to get the ball rolling. It seemed to me that 9 was a little much. But by no means should we get away from the citizen involvement, and that's there should be more citizens on each committee than there are council members. So.
Thank you, David. That is the way I read it on here.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that was our thought process on that. I mean, by all means, it wasn't,
I
things,
just saw the 3 to 4 member committees with 3 council
oh,
members.
yeah,
So I was thinking it was only a 3
Same
or 4
thing.
member committee.
yeah.
People were talking about.
Yeah, we definitely felt that the council members needed to come back and at least they'd be able to share what had happened at the committee level. Ron?
Thanks, Mr. President. One of the things I didn't see on here was, which is always a opportunity to discussion is the ongoing maintenance or operations of a project that we build. I mean, I think that at some point that really needs to be weighed heavily into the, I mean, we build a museum or whatever, and then we're spending $300,000 or $400,000 a year to maintain that museum on top of the initial capital outlay. I don't think that, it seems to me in my research that the 2012 process was designed to create another, budget item. So
Okay.
I think that we need to consider ongoing operational and maintenance costs on a project and who's going to pay for them and whatever the case may be when we decide in these committees.
Look at his mouth.
It's not on here because from 2005 to 2010, there's no change. That's already written in ordinance and who will pay the O&M cost. The council just needs to have the political will to say, and we've said it time and time again, that you come with a project, you pay the O&M cost. That's in ordinance, that's already there. Should we put it down and further say it? That, sure, maybe we should, but there wasn't a change from 2005 to 2010, which is the reason why you don't see it on here.
I'll recognize Mayor Al Hanks.
Thank you. I was fortunate to go through a couple rounds of this, and I just want to add a few comments. And I would agree with basically what's been said here. The one thing I would suggest is, though, in this last round of 2012, in my opinion, we had a tendency to water down what 2012 was all about, because we put so many projects, and what we try to do is we try to give a little bit of money to a lot of different projects. The original concept behind 2012, which is the real name is Rapid City Economic Development and Civic Improvement Fund. That's what the ordinance says, was to do projects that the city could not otherwise afford to do. The original plan had 6 major projects in it. And one of the things I would encourage you to do is to look at those projects that you cannot otherwise do. And I'll pick on one project in the last round of 2012 that made absolutely no sense to me. It was putting $10,000 to put signage along the bike path. That's not a 2012 project. It's not. The other thing I want to just mention is the fact that one of the thresholds, one of the indicators of public support that I've always used to determine whether a plan had broad support from the community is their ability to raise money. Now, of course, if it's a city project, it will get funded typically 100%, just like the ice arena did, just like a lot of the other improvements like the Indoor Aquatic Center. They will be funded 100% because typically we don't go out and do fundraising for a municipal project. But when you have proposals from other organizations, whether it's a nonprofit or other organization, I think it's important for them to be able to demonstrate their public support. And one of the ways that you can get an indication of what kind of public support they have is their ability to go out and fundraise. All too often, if you don't put some kind of threshold that they have to meet, they're going to come to the city and they're going to look for 100% funding. And what will happen is you'll have no opportunity to gauge what kind of true public support there is other than your perception and the number of people that they can fill the room with. Because there's going to be some projects out there that will be able to, and I'm not going to name names, but in this last go round, what will happen is you have certain groups that want a project funded and they have the ability to fill the entire room up, and other groups which may have just as worthy as a project is a smaller group, but they can't fill the room up with people. So you have to be careful about the perception, and you have to have some kind of an indicator of truly what kind of public support there is. And the ability to do fundraising, in my mind, is a very clear indication of how much public support there is. And having said all that, I would encourage you to take a look at the larger projects versus the smaller ones. And I think someone mentioned it as, where's the tipping point? So I would encourage you to look at bigger projects that have more of a global impact on the community as a whole versus specialty projects that have a smaller impact. The other thing is, and I just have to chime in just a little bit as far as changing the percentages. I was actually the chairman of the task force that put these rules together. If you actually look at the definition of what municipal infrastructure is, if you look at the definition of what civic improvement is, I don't want to use the word vague, but they're flexible. And the reason we did that was intentional. The other thing I'd like to pitch is keep in mind, and I think Alderman Quaker touched upon this, is the fact that we're a community which is somewhat unusual, somewhat unique, because we take half of the second penny sales tax, set it aside for these projects. That's great for our community. It's been absolutely incredible of all the facilities that we've been able to build in Rapid City. We have a quality of life like no one else in the region. But the trade-off for that is our continued struggle of paying for infrastructure within the city, because most communities use the entire second penny for infrastructure. Not saying that we should do that. What I'm saying is just be careful of the trade-off, because when we talk about municipal infrastructure, that can mean a lot of things. That can be roads, it can be water and sewer lines, it can also be municipal buildings, it can be fire stations and so forth. And so if you throw the idea out that you're gonna flip the percentages and go from 50% of infrastructure to 50% of civic improvements, what would worry me is you would be sending somewhat of a mixed signal out to the community saying, we're not going to spend money on city projects. What we're going to do is we're going to spend half of 2012 on projects other than municipal projects. So I think you need to be just a little bit careful of the message that you send out. And I think my 5 minutes is up. Thank you.
All right, in full disclosure, you said that project had $10,000 worth of funding for the signage.
Didn't even
It
have
was
that.
5.
5,000, okay.
Where's the other 5?
I'll recognize Alderman Ron Whitenbach.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your comments. And as you're commenting, you hit on municipal infrastructure and civic improvement. Could you just take a couple minutes and hit it on economic development?
Sure.
Thanks.
There again, if you look at the definition of economic development, and I don't know if I have it right here, but the whole intent was to be able to have opportunities to increase the overall economic base of our community. Now, that can mean a couple different things. You can use that, say, on an incubator, like what we have done in the past. You can also use it as part of the Opportunity Capture Fund, which we currently do. So it isn't strictly about creating jobs, it's creating opportunities to create those jobs.
Follow up, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm taking advantage of this because I think his input's very important, because I'm reading that, how it's laid out under the ordinances, and it talks about the monies from economic development are paid back into the city of Rapid City. I guess at some point,
That'd be like that
Has it
Opportunity
been-
Capture Fund, I think.
yeah, but what's happened to that money after it gets paid back?
The Opportunity Capture Fund?
Well, I maybe this could be a separate comment. I'll just put an email together because I have some questions on it. But yeah, let's make it a separate conversation.
Next, I'd like to recognize Alderwoman Patty Martinson.
Yeah, I just want to bring up one of the idea of community support for this is, can you demonstrate, these groups demonstrate the economic impact to their projects to the community, either dollar-wise or number of people served or something of that nature. That might be too big of a burden, maybe for the smaller group, and that might be an option to judge how much community support this is and how many people it would serve, either economic-wise or some other service.
Thank you, Patty. I'll recognize Alderman Bill Wall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I like the discussion and how this meeting is flowing, but I would like, just so we get in kind of a organized fashion, discuss each blocked area, such as committees, timeline, structure, funding, and then other items for discussion. Because what I foresee is if we want to fit into this timeline and get everything in front of legal and finance, then I would think we should, as a body today, decide how we want to change the ordinance and set the timeline, and then make a decision on how we're going to split the funding so that we can get this process started. So that would be my suggestion. Thank you.
That's a good suggestion, Bill. I'll recognize Alderman Chapman.
Bill, I agree with you in some logical order, maybe go down, but I envision that structure, if there was a need to change the ordinance, could actually happen in the month of December, starting at legal and finance. So, you know, with this discussion, you know, maybe this discussion, and I was going to ask, what would you like to see linked to all of these agendas, the ordinance, the past projects, you know, whatever it is that we need to see to make that decision. I think that this decision about that structure, the committees, all can be made through the legal and finance and the council structure in the month of December. The deadline, the first deadline that we would really need to meet is, have we decided that by January 1st, so that we can start to get applications out on the street, publications out on the street, so that people are then aware that the process is going to take place over the next 30 days for, if you want to be a committee member, and then the next 60 days if you're thinking of bringing a project forward. So I don't think the decision has to be made today, but definitely we can go down and talk through that.
I'll recognize Karen Olson.
Thank you. One thing that will be real important in the submittal process is that we are very specific. A number of projects came forward last year, or the last round, that were in fact using public land of various sorts. And I think now, when the application comes forward, it should be very specific. If it has been, it's using parkland or any other public facility, it should be so indicated, and whatever is the governing normal committee or body that regulates whatever that is, they should have signed off on it, because a number of projects came forward in which no one had talked to the Park and Rec Advisory Board, and no one had talked to Parks and Rec as a department. So here were these surprise uses of land. Now, I realize some of that is a function of the fact that Park and Rec is a relatively new committee, and there's some growth pains that were associated with that. But that should be, I think, really important in the application process, is that there is some knowledge that we're asking for something from public use.
I'll recognize Mayor Allen Hicks.
Thank you. And Karen brings up a very important point, because of the fact that if any of the proposed projects are going to go on dedicated parkland, under state statute, it is the Parks and Rec Board that actually clears that. And there are only specific uses that can actually occur on dedicated parkland, as we all know from the Rapid Journal. But, you know, most of the projects that would typically be applied for would probably fit that criteria. And I'll just very quickly, you know, in dedicated parklands, of course, if it's recreational, it can go in there. If it's a museum, if it is a library, if it's an art gallery, if it's a gymnasium, if it's ball fields, all those things can go in the parkland. But before they actually present it, I think they should get the sign off of the Parks and Rec Committee, because under state statute, they're the ones that actually approve the use within dedicated parkland.
Thank you, Mayor Hicks. I think Mr. Waugh had a good point on this. I guess I'd like to get a consensus on the council on the proposal that Malcolm and I brought forward with the 3 council members, the 4 persons. Is that something we should bring forward? Is the consensus, is that something they'd see at Legal and Finance? I'll recognize Alderman Ron Whitenbach.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't have a problem if you want to bring it forward as a suggestion, or,
Yeah, that's
I mean, because obviously I think the true place for it to be vetted is on the dais.
Yeah.
At a public, I know this is a public meeting too, but at a public meeting where we can discuss it, give me some time to think about it on the onset. I think it looks reasonable, but I think that having the opportunity to get input from my constituents, because
Sure.
if they read about it in the journal or whatever, I think that they'll call me or contact me in some way to give their input, because it's an important community thing, and the more information we can get out to the public and about our meetings and what we're talking about, the more input we can get, obviously will make the process better. And I like the fact that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're just trying to make things a little bit smoother and a little bit better, and there's a lot of good ideas today. But I had a question about the previous round of 2012, and understanding that we're trying to set a precedent moving forward, but we have some projects obviously that aren't complete. And how do we finish that? Is that something we decide on? Mr. Mayor has
I'll recognize Allen Hicks.
Actually, under the ordinance, once the plan is expired, that's the end of the plan. So if there are projects that have not moved forward, they can be placed into the following plan, but there is no automatic carryover. So any project that is out there that does not start and we have not appropriated the money for it, there is no guarantee under the current rules that they will be funded in the next round of 2012. You can, I want to be very clear about that, I'm not suggesting you don't. What I'm saying is there's no automatic carryover.
We talked about benchmarks and things like that. Some of these groups haven't met their benchmarks, in my mind. So is that something we need to talk about on a separate issue then, I would assume, and look at it? And because I think Alderman Olson made a very, very important point of the benchmarks judging the support from the community is huge. And some of these projects have been in the works for 5 years. They got 2 or 3 people, and I just don't want to get caught up in that same process as we move forward.
Thank you, Ron. I recognize Alderman Sam Quaker.
I think you guys are on the right track. I like what you've put together. I do think that the 50% municipal infrastructure should stay that way. And then I think as far as the committees go, the council will all have a vote later in the process. And I think when you set up a committee that has 2 voting council members on it, it might have more of I think maybe more as a liaison would be better. So my recommendation would be a 7-member citizen committee with 1 or 2 council liaisons for each committee that are non-voting. My thought.
All right. Malcolm was next, and then
Just to address Ron's question, that the mayor, and the mayor is absolutely right. I mean, just the last round, the Doll hadn't started. I mean, they had started fundraising. That project they pitched at whatever committee they pitched their project at, they were awarded no funding in the 3rd round of 2012. The council said, no, we're going to award some money to the Doll as well as the performing arts, and we did. So the mayor's right. There's no guarantee. I have helped, as you well know, and you've been part of that group, the soccer group, and that's what I've shared with them along the way, that there's no guarantees, but we have appropriated money now for design for both ATA and for soccer. So I mean, I think the council or the 2012 committee will take those sorts of things into play as we think about what should move on to the next round or not. But there's no guarantees, and they know that.
Would
that
that
be
be
know
part
that.
of this process, Malcolm?
It could be. I mean,
That's a whole.
I mean, we can say. I mean, let's say the soccer project is not done. Should they present for these next round of 2012? That's a discussion. That's a point for us to decide, I think. My other comment was going to be, I'm glad Sam made some comments about what he thought this structure should look like. And again, this was just to kickstart a discussion.
Yeah.
I think what I will ask Maggie to put on the agenda for legal and finance probably will be none of the verbiage that you see here. It'll just say committees, timeline, structure, funding, other discussion items for 2012. So it won't have any of this. This was just something to tweak our minds and at least start the discussion. As I said, how we got to 25% municipal infrastructure from 50 is because a council member said we should discuss that. And if the council member thinks we should discuss it, it's no guarantee that anyone's going to move in that direction to change it, but it should be discussed. So.
thank you, Malcolm. I recognize Alan Hicks, Mayor.
2 very short points. First of all, Alderman Quaker mentioned that as far as voting members on the committee, I think I agree with that. The only thing that I may suggest is, instead of just having 2 council members on 3 committees, that would have a tendency to leave it 4 people without the opportunity to serve. So if anything, what I would suggest is similar to what Alderman Chapman was saying, was assign 3 people per committee and then have the president of the council be able to rotate. That way everyone has the opportunity to participate. One other point that I would strongly suggest, and I think we ran into this last time, is the fact that whoever is going to be considered to be appointed to these committees, I think it needs to be very clear that they cannot be advocating or part of a program that's going to be brought forward. Because I will tell you what will happen is if you have an organization out there and they have a program that they know they want to push, what they're going to do is they're going to be trying to load up that committee, putting 2 or 3 people that are supporters of that project on this committee. And so I don't know exactly how you address that, other than to say maybe to listen, please submit all your names. but also please submit any relationships you have with any organization that could possibly be submitting a project, because the last thing you want to do let's talk about, what's the one where they do the ice with the little thing? Curling. We have a curling group that, and I'm just making this up. I'm making this up. You have a curling group, and, you know, they want to look at building a curling building, and so what do? They come in and they have 4 or 5 members. They only have 10 members. They have 4 or 5 of those members come in and try to be placed on one of these committees so they can load the committee up. I think you need to be very clear that we need to have folks that have no conflicts, no agenda to be placed on these committees. And I know that is somewhat of a challenge. I know.
Karen, I'm just gonna let Mr. Chapman respond. I know we have a conflict of interest form in here on this.
I was going to say, that there is a conflict of interest, but the way that the committee structure, the committees were chosen last time is that we took council leadership plus the 2 committee chairs. So the last round of 2012, we created a subcommittee that vetted those applications and actually chose the 9-person committees. That was Tom Johnson, Ron Kroger as council leadership, Karen and myself as committee chairs, and we went through every application and said, this person has infrastructure experience, this person's an engineer, this person is in the nonprofits, and that's the way the 9 committees were chosen with the 2 alternates. I would envision something very similar this time, being the same way. I think it's going to be hard to truly, I've been on the other side of 2012. I was the president of the Library Foundation when we did the expansion at the library. I was on the YFS board when we came in here and 50 strong and advocated to the council that, you know, we want money. I think it's hard. Yes, I am. I was one of the ones in here when the mayor was on the council. So I think it's hard in a community of our size with people who volunteer as much as they do to truly get people who are, you know, not associated with whatever group. But I think the council will do a good job of making sure that those committees are loaded up with people.
I didn't realize you had that process.
We did. Yep.
Next I'll recognize Ms. Karen Olson.
Well, I would just reiterate exactly what Malcolm said. We did talk about that because we are a small town, and all of you know that there's about 20% of the community that does most of the work. And so when you eliminate those folks from this process, you're eliminating the people who really know what's going on. So I think Malcolm is right. If we do that again, there was a lot of consideration to make sure that we didn't have somebody who was specifically vetting a particular project.
Thank you, Karen. You know, this has been a great meeting. I think we've gotten a lot of stuff out and gotten the start of what we need to do. From what I'm hearing is Malcolm, what we'll do is get with Maggie and have her come up with the stuff and bring it forward to legal and finance, and that gives us even more time to ask more questions. I mean, the greatest resource we got in the world is sitting in the office, Kay Rippendrap over there about the 2012. She's been around long enough. So if anybody has any further questions, or, you know, please don't hesitate to give Malcolm a call or I a call, or if I can't get it, I'll call Malcolm, we'll call Kay, we'll get the answers to your questions. But I think this has been a great start to a new beginning for our city. So I'll recognize Mr. Chapman.
Just a question that I'll throw out. Is there something that you'd like to see linked that plays a part? I heard the mayor say something about, I can't remember what the conversation was, but what it led me to believe, Karen, about the application, that, you know, the application maybe should be tweaked a little bit to say, you know, to say something different than it says today. So that'll be one of the items that we'll make sure is linked. The ordinance will be linked. You know, everything that we can possibly come up with will be linked. But if there's something specifically that you want to see linked, let's get, you know, all that stuff is already scanned in. Let's get it linked, and it'll just follow this process throughout as we continue to go throughout. And then we'll continue to link those minutes so that we'll have some history from one meeting to the next.
Sure. I'll recognize Alderman Bill Wall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't know how difficult or if it's even possible to do this, but as we go back in time and look at this process, is there a way we can figure out how we spent our money in previous projects and what classification that they would fall under? And so that not only the council but the public can see that in one round we spent 70% on civic improvements and 10% or whatever the percentages might be. so we will know how we have been spending the money and put it in just a real small readable form without, so we don't have a 20-foot Excel spreadsheet to look at, but just something, just to give us an idea how we've spent this money in previous years. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I think I'll recognize the mayor.
That'll be fairly easy to do, and the reason I say that is the first round of 2012, it was all basically civic improvements and infrastructure. Because the first 5-year plan were the 6 projects. You had Canyon Lake, you had the recycling center, you had the VIC. You had those projects that were identified up front, and there were a few added as the process went through. So that first 5-year plan was, in essence, all city projects. The second 5-year plan, there were a few exceptions, and I'm thinking of the YMCA gym as one exception, a couple others. So it really was this last round, the third round of 2012, where we started doing things that were a little bit broader in scope, I guess is a politically correct way of saying, that we're doing non-city projects. And so, yeah, the breakdown should be pretty straightforward. And the easiest way to do is look at the last 5 years, and that'll pretty much give you an indication of where we've been spending the money based upon the categories that we established.
But I think this would be very good for the public,
Yeah.
for the citizens of Rapid City to be able to look back over the years, and whether the Journal prints it or a TV station airs it or somebody puts it out there, so the citizens of Rapid City realize just how good a program we have. So
Can I make a suggestion?
I would make the task of that of the mayor's office.
Let me make a suggestion, and I'll come back and talk to the council. Maybe one of the things as we start down this process is to actually put together a piece, both that we can put on electronic media and also something we put in the paper, and just basically show all the different projects that have been funded through 2012. Because if you actually go online, you can actually look at those on our website. And I'm going to tell you what, most people don't realize how many projects and which projects have been funded. If you look at almost all the great projects over the last 10, 15 years, almost all of them have been funded through 2012, whether it's into our skating rink, Sioux Park, Roosevelt Park, Canyon Lake Park, recycling. I mean, there's so many things that 2012 has done, and maybe what we need to do, I hate to say it, but you know what, maybe we should brag on ourselves a little bit here. Let me see about putting something together, and I wouldn't be opposed to suggesting that we spend a little bit of a few dollars and go out and promote the concept again, because all too often people sort of forget what 2012 really means to the community.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up? I'll recognize Alderman Ron.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does this process sunset at some time, this tax?
Every 5 years.
So,
By ordinance, every 5 years, it was specifically designed to do this. This is the way they originally sold it back, and they started pitching this in 1992, and I believe the first round of 2012 was actually first adopted in 1995, and it was referred to a vote twice during that time. And it's specifically designed to expire to sunset at the end of every 5 years, and that's why the city council has to adopt a brand new plan by ordinance every 5 years.
Mr. Mayor, the other question, the half penny sales tax, and is it, I mean, I recall at some time, I'm not sure if somebody had challenged it and brought it to referendum, or if this is continuing, I mean, does that half cent continue on
Typically,
forever?
what they can only do at this point, because the tax has been established, so there's no referring the actual tax.
Okay.
What they can do is, like any action, the citizens always have the ability to refer any ordinance or resolution that you pass. So if they're going to refer anything, what they would do is they would refer the ordinance establishing the next plan.
Okay.
Now, and I'm going to take off, and I don't know if Kieran, I apologize if you've covered this already. Okay, what's that, Jason? Am I wrong? Okay, explain this.
I'll recognize City Attorney Jason Gray.
Thank you. The ordinance is in place and will continue to exist until it's repealed by the city council.
Okay.
The 5-year plan has to be updated every year, but that's not a sunset provision. No, everything will continue. It's just that you wouldn't be able to spend the money until you adopted the plan. I think the 5-year plan is probably referable, but we'd have to do a little research to confirm that.
I
Sure,
appreciate
split hairs
that.
with me, okay.
I understood what you're saying, but the tax itself continues on.
Yes.
Okay, so we're not looking at having to revote on this is what I'm saying. I guess the bottom line question. Thank
Yeah.
you.
The other thing is keep in mind the original concept, and I'm not sure if Karen touched on this at the beginning of this meeting or not. The original concept was to put all the projects together so you had enough synergy, enough support for all the projects collectively instead of each one trying to stand on their own, because all too often what would happen is if we were to try and vote on each one of these individual programs by themselves, there may not be enough support or collective mass to actually support each individual one. And the other thing, and more importantly, and this is why I think they did it, was we don't want projects competing with each other. Once they make the plan, they all support themselves. And that was the concept of actually adopting everything in one vote versus if you have separate votes, then what could happen is, Jason, lean forward, thank you. If you were to vote on each individual project, then each individual project would be able to, if they're able to be referred, would be able to be referred individually versus collectively. Is that a fair statement? I gotta make sure I'm right.
I think what the council, even if the council voted them in or out of the plan, I think the council's final action is really the adoption of the plan. So I think only the
Right.
whole plan could be referred,
but
not the individual projects.
No, but my point was, is since we adopt everything as a package, the only thing it can be referred to would be the overall package, versus if we adopted each individual project as a separate plan,
Yes.
then you could refer each one.
Okay, red light.
That's
I
what,
have to try and beat him on
Red
something.
light.
that's what he said.
Aaron, did you have a question?
repeat it a third time.
Okay. Does anybody else have a dying desire to speak? I'd like to share on this. So consensus I got is that we're gonna bring this forward and we'll work on it in legal and finance and at the council level, but if I highly encourage you to look back through some of the minutes of the past 2012. That's where I found out some of the questions, and me and Malcolm found out what to bring forward and so forth, so, we'll definitely do that. We just need a motion to.
Motion to adjourn?
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the same. Motion carries. We're adjourned.